Welcome to another episode of Governance This Week as we take a look at the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And we're wondering, how does this bureaucracy contribute to shaping policies that affect your daily life? And what about the critics of this organization? Well, with us we have Professor Claudio Radaelli, who together with Fabrizio De Francesco wrote this compendium, the Elgar Companion on the OECD, nearly 300 pages of analysis of, I quote, the OECD as transnational policymaker, idea broker, and standard setter. Welcome, Claudio.
Thank you for having me.
Can you give us some examples of how the OECD contributes to shaping policies that affect people's lives?
Well, to understand the role of the OECD and how this organization changes our life, we need a bit of history because the OECD has mutated over the decades as OECD. It was established in 1961, but before that it was the OEEC, an organization for European economic cooperation. So it was a kind of Marshall Plan enhanced organization to support European countries in the recovery from World War II. Over the years, the OECD has changed the membership. So we are now speaking of an organization of 38 countries, no longer exclusively European. And since at least 2006, the OECD has also built a kind of engagement, enhanced engagement with countries that are not members of the OECD. Therefore, the creature has grown through crises, through episodes of major rethinking, and has not been the same during the decades. Now, we have to also consider that the OECD has changed its raison d'etre, its fundamental philosophy. Initially, as I said, the main reason of existing was the recovery past the war. And then it was a big moment of being the key organization for what I would call an economic Cold War. In the sense that in the Cold War years, it was the army, let's say, of thinkers, of diplomats, of managers, of bureaucrats involved in building an economic counterpart to the countries that were in the orbit of the Soviet Union. And also now it looks, as many years ago, but I was speaking of decades, an organization dedicated to dealing with, first with colonial policies, so a bigger outreach towards what was called development, but it was colonial policies, and then decolonization, so the new transformation. Then you zoom a bit further after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and you find the OECD engaged in accompanying the transition of former Soviet economies towards some kind of privatization, public-private partnerships, new models of economic governance. So again, a raison d'etre that has changed. And then I would say in the last years, its role has been mostly to stabilize economic relations and trade relations across the globe, to engage more with countries called BRICS. And in the end, I think the OECD has also been active in areas like education, where originally it didn't have a role and now is a key playmaker. So changing raison d'etre, obviously with the end of the Cold War, it had to reinvent itself. And the final point is a change in economic doctrines, right? The OECD main business is to think about economic governance, economic models, macroeconomy. Initially, the OECD, 61 to the 70s, was dedicated to a philosophy that we called John Maynard Keynes at home, Adam Smith abroad, like Keynesian demand management, fine-tuning of the economy, interventionism, expenditure at home, but at the global level, healthy market-driven competition, free trade, capital market liberalization gradually, right? Avoidance of double taxation so the companies could work better in an international environment. Then the OECD was the first organization to have a group of thinkers alerted on the ecological and social consequences of growth. So the apostle, a prophet of growth, was the first to realize that there were problems that inspired a little bit of the work of the Club of Rome, only to be majorly defeated in few years by the mounting wave of supply-side economics, monetarism, medium and long-term policy objectives, forget about fine-tuning the demand, intervening. I remember some papers of the OECD were very clear from interventionism to regulatory governance. Good regulation, possibly light regulation of markets, much better than intervening in every single market. So we had the decade of privatization, public management, reforms, the Washington Consensus. Now, last 10 years, the philosophy is inclusive growth. So still growth, but qualified as socially and environmentally acceptable. And the debate, do they really believe in this? Are they doing that? Because, but honestly, if we talk about economic doctrines, we can see changes over the decades. So that when people say the OECD is a major player in defining economic models or paradigms, it is true with a qualification that these paradigms change over the decades.
Thank you, Claudio. That gives us a good idea of the scope and also kind of the developments that have happened at the OECD throughout the decades. Could you kind of talk to us a little bit about how the OECD actually does this, as in how does it influence the rules that countries around the world follow, shaping the economy and the environment?
Okay, this is the paradox. The OECD shapes global rules, but is not a regulator. The OECD is not a supranational organization. They cannot define rules on chemicals, on the environment, on labor. So what are they doing here? Okay, but it is true that they shape global rules. Maybe because they do a kind of a meta-regulatory activity. Well, let's try to understand practically what that is. Number one, they are very active on policy ideas, narratives, framing. So for example, today we talk about agile governance. The OECD has been one of the major players in giving it a shape, in suggesting how it should be transferred into tools and how that would help with recovery and resiliency programs of its member states and beyond. In the past, the OECD was very active with the European Commission in articulating a narrative of harmful tax competition. That was very difficult because the OECD was saying tax competition is good because it means efficiency. However, there are cases where it can be harmful. So they want to hit, obviously, on some jurisdictions, on tax havens, on tax erosion and tax avoidance, blacklist, and they have the intellectual power, also because of the links with academics, to shape these narratives. Part of the new public management, what we think about public management reforms, or part of the regulatory reform tools, deregulation, re-regulation, high-quality regulation, social inclusive regulation, have come with a major player in Paris at the OECD. And here maybe we say something later, but the OECD has been very good, not just being the think tank of the rich countries, as someone says, but also a bureaucracy with formidable links with academics, with researchers, especially with economists. So narratives, ideas, it's politically important because the way people think leads to the way people act. Number two, I would say a methods-driven approach to governance. They were the first to do multilateral surveillance, peer review, reasoning on each other's reforms, and it's anathema in international organization. Imagine a Belgian delegate looking at a tax scheme of an Irish delegate and saying that maybe that's harmful, no, it's not harmful, or someone from South Korea talking about schools in Canada and having a discussion on the PISA indicators. And the OECD has been able to run that as a conversation that is based on the principles of peer review, multilateral surveillance, indicators. So you measure and you start doing rankings. You have rankings and you have a discussion. Why are number 5 and not number 3? Well, come here, let's have peer review, multilateral discussion, etc. So this has led the policy evaluations or policy appraisal of the OECD, like governance at a glance, education at a glance, to be embedded in this method-driven governance. So that there is no end point. The method is the end point. Do the peer review and you will find out your own itinerary. It's a kind of learning method. When it works, it really triggers policy learning. Number 3, diffusion of what I call frameworks. For example, they were the first to diffuse a model for double tax treaties. You want to be nice to companies and not tax them twice? The OECD offers you a model. You can do what you want, but we have 28 articles and you can choose. They are ready for adoption. The more countries adopt these models, the better it is for the OECD without necessarily setting rules. Another example is transfer pricing convention. The OECD has a model of our convention on transfer pricing of multinationals should be done. It's been successful, it's been copied, it's been diffused, voluntary, to the point that it becomes difficult for a country not to be in compliance with at least the essence of these guidelines. There have also been moments of failure. Spectacular failure was the multilateral agreement on investment negotiated through the end of the 1990s, where the OECD wanted to set the global rules for trade and therefore get into the territory of the WTO. And that was the first moment of hard contestation from civil society organizations, anti-globalization. And the multilateral agreement on investment became the totemic entity to be attacked because it was the emblem of a kind of globalization that was resisted by civil society organizations. And finally, one word on how the OECD can influence without setting rules: data. They have the power of the best data, and data mean comparison. Data also mean the possibility to grasp entities that before the OECD were impossible to grasp in numbers. I'll give you an example. Although we know everything about expenditure and taxation, we didn't know about regulatory quality, how many rules, whether they're good, they're bad. And the OECD with the World Bank, and now the OECD as the lead, created these IREG, indicators of regulatory governance, so you get all the countries nicely plotted, the rankings, you have, again, a way to get a numerical index, if you want. And the same with education, hugely contested and hugely successful, and maybe contested because it was successful. The PISA system is an appraisal system. Everyone says it's not the only one. It's been the most popular, and indicators are important, not because they're correct, but because people believe in indicators, and that's reality.
So I think it's by now clear to our viewers that Professor Claudio Radaelli is Mr. Regulation at the School of Transnational Governance, but also in charge of the fellowships program. So just for you to have that background. Let's zoom in a bit more. You mentioned actually the first time that the OECD got into trouble already, but what kind of challenges does an organization like the OECD face, and what are the people that criticize them saying?
Number one, the OECD is no longer a geopolitical platform. And this is the result of the end of the Cold War and the current situation of having a world where there are many axes of friction, many areas of unpeace, many areas of war. We have here at the school many reflections and videos on this topic. But clearly, even if you go well before the 2000, with the arrival of the G7, the G20, this kind of geopolitical idea of the OECD has lost traction. In the past, archival research has found documents by diplomats working with the OECD. They were saying the OECD is a great place where we don't need a sanitized language, and we can articulate the positions that then we bring to the UN, that then we Europeans or rich countries bring to the WTO, to the UN. And now no one would think of the OECD creating a common position of Germany, US, Canada, Australia, so that they go to the United Nations. Second tier. The OECD is a second tier in geopolitics. Okay, what do they say in Paris? The OECD would say, yes, but we are still a player in a world of recombinant governance that is not linear. OECD, UN, actually key countries, OECD position, and then United Nations. The world has changed, and we are changing with this world where no one has a key position, and the real power is the power of connections, the power of partnerships, the power of contacts, and we'll come later to that point. Second big criticism. I wrote Club of the Rich Countries, but more sophisticated way of saying is that it was the identity generating club of the West, so that through the OECD, the economic thinking of NATO got to emerge as something coherent. All the narratives we were saying before. The OECD has declined over the decades what the paradigm of growth was, only to change it later, but certainly there was no better place to go to learn about doing growth in the 60s and 70s. Here, the OECD is in crisis, I think, because of reality. The growth rates outside the OECD are simply much, much higher than the growth rates of a country like Germany, France, or Canada, okay? So if you are the apostle of growth and your countries are not doing that well on growth, you go China, you go the BRICS, you're clearly losing the game at home. The reality is telling you that you're not doing well. And that explains perhaps why the OECD has done all this enhanced engagement with the countries that grow a lot. So, and also today South Korea is a member and they grow well. So, it's been able to buy in countries that grow, and therefore is no longer this club of ossified economies plus US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. It's a more varied compound, and therefore the story of a club of the rich countries is a little bit less prominent than before. Although I think there would still like to be the identity generating club of these countries. I also think that the OECD has been able to learn in its own ways. Obviously, it's extremely constrained by national diplomats. It's not the European Commission that has some degrees of independence. It hasn't got a court to say, the OECD bureaucrats are right, let's discipline these members, but has been able to learn and to adapt to the world in terms of narrative, paradigms. So in a sense, one cannot really categorize the OECD as this, is a club of rich countries fixed on privatization. It's not true. If we look at what they say and do, they've been evolving, especially with Secretary General Goria. There has been this emphasis on inequality, ecology, the ecological green transition, and the slogan of the OECD today is kind of better lives. That's a little bit esoteric, but clearly shows that it's no longer the economy first and full stop. It's perhaps the economy first with qualifications.
Indeed. So also, economy for the people, with that slogan, better lives. Professor Radaelli has mentioned the term BRICS a few times. Most of our viewers already know that we're not talking about the material you build houses with, but that this is about Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, strong emerging economies that play an increasingly dominant role on the world stage. Talking about the world stage, let's have a look at how the OECD compares to other international bureaucracies shaping global governance and public policy.
Okay, Roland, here the key words are polycentricity and networking. Polycentricity in the sense that there is authority in the global order, but it does not hinge on one pivotal organization. It's dispersed across different organizations. And the OECD, given its constrained mandate, is not the word government, given the fact that it's always been interacting with other organizations from the point of view, okay, we do economics, and then, as we said, they also do development, they do education, they do environment, they do technology, they do science policy, but this kind of work, policy level, has been good to accept a position of one of the organizations in the context of a polycentric world of governance. So the OECD is not aspiring to get bigger than the WTO, for example. As I said before, there was a moment where it was kind of first tier geopolitical, so not just economic organization. And now the OECD interacts with the G20 at the political and technical level, but certainly it's not as important as the G20. And I would stress the verb to interact, and that's the networking thing of the OECD is particularly important. In the last few years, the OECD has activated partnerships with 50 secretariats of international organizations, has launched 15 global forums that go beyond member state delegates. They're truly transnational. They look at science, education, technology, innovation. On this, the OECD has been very good at thinking about we have to survive in this world where governments matter, international organization matters, and global fora or forums matter. So we have to be key players inside a network type of governance where authority, as I said, is dispersed. Now, we live in a world of uncertainty, also uncertainty of epistemic knowledge. What is the knowledge we need to fix the economy, to repair climate damage, to do well on social inclusion? The OECD, as a thinking organization, has always been very good at keeping alive partnerships with university researchers, with academics, with intellectuals, where you could see the discussion going more or less at the same level between OECD managers and academics. This is important because it allows the OECD to have sensors in very different types of knowledge, from Asia to Europe, US, Australia. It's always been the place where new ideas about governance and economic governance, and more recently, in the last 30 years, education, environment, social policy, development, are discussed, are aired. So this flexibility of the OECD makes it a little bit of what I would say, again, a learning organization, because if you engage with transgovernmental and transnational networks, your ears are more open. That if we are the big club, we know everything inside, and you go out and you hit the wall. So it's the ears of the OECD are open. Obviously, it can move only as fast as the member states are allowed it to move. As I said before, hasn't got a court or independence to back up its actions. But it seems that in a world where polycentricity is key, the OECD can survive, although some of the core businesses of the past are over, like the geopolitical first-year forum.
Claudio, thanks so much for sharing these insights with us. I learned a lot from it. I'm sure that also our viewers got a lot of new insights. And in fact, for those who are interested, you know, of course, that you can get this very old-fashioned paper book, and I guess there's also a digital version.
You can buy the individual chapters. Yeah.
Exactly, including also some chapters by other professors here at the School of Transnational Governance. So not only Claudio's work, just to remind you, the Elgar Companion to the OECD, 300 pages if you want to delve into this topic any further. Thank you, Claudio.
Thank you.